I'd like to welcome everyone to the Water Sensitivities Index and Transition Dynamics Framework, part one. So this week we have part one, next week we have part two. This is the second in a series of webinars that we've had for New South Wales and others who wanted to join. Today we have, well, kind of three main speakers, but lots of speakers in the end. So we have Katie from the CRC, and she's going to do an overview of the Water Sensitive Cities tool, or Water Sensitive Cities Index tool, and the Transition Dynamics Framework tool as well, and they go hand in hand. Julia Barnes and Alan Benson are from Water New South Wales, and they're going to be our first case study off the rank. So they're going to talk about how they utilized the two tools internally. And there's a spider beside me, and I hope it's not poisonous. Sorry. And then Jeffrey Smith and his team at Blue Mountains will be presenting their Blue Mountains City Council case study. And then I'll finish up at the end just with talking about the other webinars that we have in the series, as well as I'll do questions too. So just a little housekeeping. I've muted everyone, and I'll do that throughout the presentation, except for the presenter, obviously. So we'll use the chat function. So if while people are talking, you have questions, and just put them in there, and we'll try and get to them. Or answer them in the chat itself. And then also I'm recording the webinar. So if anyone doesn't want to be recorded or anything, just make sure we can't see your video. And that's it. So I might hand over to, stop sharing screen, might hand over to Katie then. Let's see if Katie.
Thanks, Beth. Yep, I'm here.
Excellent.
Cool, I'll just share my screen. Can everyone see that?
No. Yes.
Yes. Cool. It's the slide full screen. Okay, cool. So hi everyone, my name is Katie Hammer. For those of you who I don't know, I've been working with the Cooperative Research Centre for Water Sensitive Cities for the past, it's been about 5 years now, working all in the Water Sensitive City Transitions program. Been involved in a number of research projects and a number of adoption projects as well. And I'm based at Monash University in Melbourne. And so today I'm going to be talking specifically about two tools that are involved in the Water Sensitive City transitions work that we do. The first one, as Beth said, the Water Sensitive Cities Index, and also the Transition Dynamics Framework. So it's a lot of words in the names of the tools, but I will go through kind of just an overview, and then hopefully they'll start to come to life once you see some of the case studies as well. So when we talk about transitioning to water sensitive cities, it's really about figuring out how a city or a system or a local council can transition from their current water system, which is often characterized by traditional centralized large-scale water systems and water infrastructure, to a more water sensitive city approach, which, as we all know, it's flexible, adaptive, lots of decentralized solutions as well, and starts to bring in a lot more stakeholders than your just traditional water engineers. So this image makes it look like a really easy process, but actually it's not. There's a lot of incremental steps that need to happen along the way to make sure that we get to where we want to be at the end. And there's a lot of opportunity, I guess, to actually fall off that desired trajectory and to end up in a more undesirable state. So things can happen such as encountering path-dependent lock-in, where you become locked into one particular pathway. Things such as backlash, so something unexpected comes up and really kind of just, throws a spanner in the works and causes a failure of the system. And then also things like system breakdown. So that's when you don't even actually have any practices being adopted at all, and you maintain business as usual practice, which will not suffice for future generations. So with all of that in mind, one of the big research questions in the CRC is, how do we successfully navigate that transition from current practice to our future water sensitive city vision? So we've done a number of research projects and programs all around that question. One major project that I was involved in is IRP1, so the first integrated research project. which looked at developing up a transitions planning process for cities to undertake when they're wanting to become more water sensitive. So it's kind of helping guide cities strategically figure out what needs to be done on the ground to achieve the water sensitive city vision. Just a quick overview, we tested the process in these 6 case study cities. And yeah, each one involved a number of workshops from stakeholders across really diverse disciplines. So out of that testing process and other research projects, we've kind of developed and refined these 2 key transition tools that I'm going to talk through today. So just firstly on the Water Sensitive Cities Index, this tool really addresses the question of where are we now. So it looks at current performance and helps diagnose current areas of strength and areas that need improvement in relation to becoming a water sensitive city. A few of you might have seen this framework before, but this is called the Urban Water Transitions Framework. And this is out of some research done back in 2009 from Tony Wong and Rebecca Brown. It basically articulates the different developmental states that a city goes through as they become more developed and on their journey to becoming more water sensitive. So just quickly, as a city is first developed, the first key driver with respect to water management is delivering safe and secure water supply for people. And then your services of sewerage and drainage. So those are the 3 key water system services that really, protect human health. And then once those are developed and cities start to expand their water management systems, we start to focus more on waterways and environmental outcomes. The water cycle city then looks at taking that kind of closed loop approach and sustainable resource use. And then finally a water sensitive city, which as we all know, takes into account communities, livability and resilience aspirations, and things like intergenerational equity and resilience as well. And obviously, as we move from left to right across this continuum, we see that key shift from that kind of traditional centralized approach to water management to a more decentralized and integrated and water sensitive approach. So the Water Sensitive Cities Index was developed to help cities identify where they sit along that continuum in order to identify where they need to focus actions to then progress. It is made up of 7 goals of a water sensitive city, which basically define what it means to be a water sensitive city. These are these 7 areas on the screen now, which range from biophysical aspects, so productivity and resource efficiency, adaptive infrastructure, ecological health, quality urban space. And they also include those more social and institutional goals, so water sensitive governance, community capital, and equity of essential services. As I said before, the purpose of the index is to benchmark current performance of a place and to help people understand what it means to be a water sensitive city and what goals they should be aspiring to. So its first kind of purpose is to provide that diagnostic insight to support future actions. As I said, you can analyze strengths and weaknesses and see which goals you're performing well in and which goals you need more attention to. The second and equally as important objective of the index is to foster industry collaboration. So as you saw when we moved left to right across that continuum, we started to bring in a lot more, a bigger diversity of stakeholders. So it's not just your water engineers, it's also your urban planners, your urban designers, your communities, your governments. And so a key purpose of the index is to bring people together across all those disciplines to have those conversations on what it means to be a water sensitive city and what they are aspiring to be. And then finally, the index helps set targets and track progress. So because each of the goals has an actual numerical score, which I'll get into in a second, how that score is decided, you can actually set short, medium, or long-term goals that are numerical, and that really helps people to communicate, I guess, and get some buy-in for why they're investing in certain types of just a bit on the development process. So the index actually had its own research project from 2014, 2016, which involved a team of academics and industry partners. They did a massive literature review. I think initially the index, there was an initial version that the industry then said, no, that's way too academic. You need to shorten it. You need to make it nice and simple. So it's gone through a number of iterations. You can see on that second row in the validation refinement, there's that integrated research project 1, which I mentioned before, which we tested in those 6 cities. And now we're rolling it out. We've applied it into 54 cities and towns now, and we're still learning, and we're rolling it out internationally as well. So gathering those lessons and refinements as well. So underneath the 7 goals, there's a set of indicators, which there are differing numbers for each of the goals. But basically, each of these indicators define what the goal means, and they're scored on a 1 to 5 rating scale. So the indicators have scores, of which each of the ratings, there's a whole detailed description that sits behind this of what a 1 means for this indicator, what a 5 means, and that sort of thing. And at the end of the day, you have each of the indicators scored, and each of the goals have a score as well. And this image here on the right is just one of the ways of visually communicating the city scores for the goals. And one of the unique things about the Water Sensitive Cities Index is that it is applied through a collaborative workshop process. So it's not just 2 or 3 experts who kind of make their own judgment calls and come up with this magical number in a back room. It's actually about 20 to 40 people, depending on the size of the city, who come together and have a discussion and come to a consensus on what the score is. And through that process of coming to a consensus is where that shared understanding comes from, because people share experiences and knowledge and share documents and projects that, you know, some people might not know of. So in every workshop that I've been in and delivered, people have said that they've learned something about, something new about the water system. So that's a really good outcome of the process. And just a quick note that is for that workshop methodology is a standardized methodology that's delivered by a number of accredited providers, but we're trialing new ways of applying the index now. So how can we use the framework in different ways when perhaps a city or council doesn't have the resources to do a full workshop? What other ways can we apply it that are still useful? And that's just a little graphic of the scoring process. So people actually poll initially, they submit initial votes on what they think the score will be, and then the discussion kind of teases out the evidence and comes to a consensus on the final score. So then when we look at results, there's a few different lenses that results are presented in. This first one is what we call the Apple Watch diagram, because it looks like an Apple Watch apparently, but it basically shows the percentage attainment of each of those city-states that we saw in the beginning. So as you can see, it's not a linear process, so you can be a certain percentage water cycle city, but also still contributing to more advanced city-states as well. So that's a really useful diagram, and people really connect to that because they like to see the progress across those city-states. And there's a couple of other lenses that people don't use so much, but they're still useful if people would like. The scores are mapped to the water sensitive city outcomes of resilience, livability, sustainability, and productivity. And then also the 3 pillars of water sensitive practice, which is just another framework. Water sensitive communities, cities as water supply catchments, and cities delivering ecological services. And then one that we're progressing now is the Sustainable Development Goals. So how does the index relate to achieving or delivering the Sustainable Development Goals? We've done a little bit of work already in just kind of mapping how a water sensitive city will deliver the different SDGs. And as you can see from this chart, the green means that there's a direct impact on that specific SDG, and the yellow means that there's an indirect impact. So this chart just shows that delivering a water sensitive city helps achieve every single sustainable development goal. So we're exploring future work on that now. Just a quick map of some applications. Heaps in Australia, a lot of local councils. We just recently did Cape Town a couple months ago, which was really interesting. And we're actually currently doing training for international providers this week. So hoping to roll out some more internationally soon. And then finally, just on the web tool, the index is embedded in a web platform that hosts all of the data, and users can easily generate all these different visual results that I've talked through. So it's a really great tool that cities and councils can use in communicating the results. So that's the index, which looks at current performance and is really focused on how the system is currently operating. Moving on to tool number 2 that I'm talking about today, the transition dynamics framework. This tool looks at how to get to where we want to be. So an important part of transition planning is creating a shared vision and really having that commitment to achieving long-term shared goals. I'm not going to talk through that today, but the transition dynamics framework basically helps cities figure out how they get from their current system to that future vision. As we said before, it's just about, as I said, getting from that current system to that future water sensitive city vision. And so the field of sustainability transitions is what this framework is embedded in or grounded in. And that field basically has identified 6 phases that a city or a system or an organization moves through in any change in practice. So this can be applied to more than just water sensitive cities. It can be applied to adopting more energy efficient practices. It can be applied to anything. Basically, it's just about changing practice. So in any change in practice, there's these 6 phases. First is that the issue emerges. People realize that there's a problem that needs addressing. In phase 2, the issue gets defined. So there's often research projects or science or investment in figuring out what exactly the issue is, what's causing it. The third phase is shared understanding and issue agreement, which is where people start to come up with solutions for the issue. So there's general understanding and awareness of the issue, and people are starting to figure out how to address it. Phase 4, knowledge dissemination, that's when the solutions start getting embedded on the ground. Policy and practice diffusion, so this is then more than just on ground, it's also becoming embedded in policy as well. And then phase 6 is when it becomes a new practice. So it's just business as usual now. And the research has identified that throughout these 6 transition phases, there's a number of enabling factors that need to be established in order to successfully move through each of those transition phases. So these are things such as champions, so the people. So do you have the individual community activists or the research specialists or the people or the organizations who are really advocating for change? So this one's really about the people. The second one's platforms for connecting. So do you have the necessary mechanisms to connect those champions and to start getting the message out there and bringing people together around the issue and solutions? Knowledge, it's pretty self-explanatory. Do you understand what the issue is and what the solutions are? Projects and applications, this is about on-ground demonstrations and really showing that the solutions are working. And finally, tools and instruments, which is around your policy, regulation, guidelines, and anything that helps support solution implementation. So what we've done is we've organized those enabling factors into a matrix. So as you'll see here, these are the 6 transition phases down the left-hand side here. And then the enabling factors are across the top. And as you move down the matrix, you can see how that specific enabling factor progresses through the 6 transition phases. So for example, if we just look at champions, in phase 1, when the issue is emerging, your champions are really your activists. So these are the people vocalizing the issue, getting the word out there, trying to get people aware. Issue definition is when you start to have champions. So people are understanding the issue, people are starting to influence their organizations in terms of looking into it more. In phase 3, your champions start to become connected and kind of forming like a cohort. There's more groups, more people understanding, and more people championing and advocating for solutions. In phase 4, you get influential champions. So you get people with high profile who have much more influence. Phase 5, you get organizational champions who are able to lead practice change. And then phase 6 is multi-stakeholder networks. So as you can see, those kind of progress across all of the enabling factors. So what we do is we come into a city or a region, and we do what we call a traffic light assessment. So we assess whether each enabling factor is present, which is green. Yellow is it's slightly present, but not fully there and at risk of not ever being present. And then red is just not present at all. So we do this type of assessment for water sensitive cities. And that informs the strategy development. So how we use this is just here in this slide. So the inputs into this application here on the left. So we have workshops. So we could potentially use the index benchmarking workshops as a source. Sometimes we do desktop review, and sometimes we do interviews as well, basically just getting all the data that we need to do this type of assessment. And then this helps us identify priority strategies. So we focus on the yellow areas because these are the areas that need to be built up in order to continue progressing down the matrix. And then out of those strategies, we have more detailed actions that form then your action plan. So we use these tools to develop a number of transition strategies within that research project, IRP1. And they're all available on the website if you wanted to have a look at the whole process from start to finish. That's it from our overview, and hopefully this will come to life through the case studies that we'll hear from next. Beth, are we stopping for questions or are we moving on?
I think we'll move on just to make sure we give everyone enough time, and then we'll do questions at the end. So thank you, Katie. That was great. I knew a lot of that stuff, but there's still some stuff I learned even after sitting through presentations like that before. So that was really great.
Yeah, good.
All right, so I'm going to hand over now to, is it Jules or Alan? Who's going to go first?
Alan will go first, but I'll share my screen.
Okay.
Let's see. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yep. Can you see, is it the full screen?
It is.
Wonderful. All right, Alan, I will hand over to you.
I'm trying to find Alan to unmute him, and he's not here in my list. Oh, here he is. You there, Alan? You can't hear Alan. You could hear him before.
Is he off mute? I can't see him.
I can see him, but I can't hear him.
I can make a start if we can't hear him in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, well, we can't hear Alan. Jules, do you mind starting while Alan
Not at all.
going on?
Not at all. And Alan, if you can hear us, just jump in whenever. So good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Julia Barnes from Water New South Wales, and we've got my manager, Alan Benson, here also, who's the Catchment Programs Manager, and I'm the Catchment Coordinator in our team. We work with partners in the Sydney's drinking water catchments to make sure the people of Sydney have safe drinking water every day. So we just wanted to start with an acknowledgement of country. We're honoured to work on the ancestral land of Aboriginal people all over Australia, and we recognise their continuing connection with and knowledge about land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures, to elders past, present and emerging. I invite you to introduce yourself in the chat and mention which land you're coming from today. Today I'm speaking from the lands of the Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation, and Alan in the Blue Mountains of the Gundungurra people. So Water New South Wales is the main supplier of raw water to Greater Sydney, capturing and delivering the water we send to Sydney Water for treatment and distribution. Water New South Wales is responsible for ensuring the Sydney declared catchment is managed and protected in a way that promotes water quality, protects public health and the environment. Our Water New South Wales urban program works to minimise pollution coming from urban areas in the catchment. As local government is responsible for managing most of the urban environment that influences runoff, including stormwater, sewage, roads, drainage, parks and reserves and car parks. They also influence business and community behaviours and improve new developments. All these things have an impact on our water quality, and for this reason, Water New South Wales works with councils to improve urban water management and minimise pollution draining into our waterways and storages. For the last few years, Water New South Wales and the CRC have had a service agreement which has allowed us to work on a number of different projects to support councils located in the Sydney drinking water catchment. Later on today, you'll hear from Jeffrey and the Blue Mountains City Council team about one of these projects. For the CRC, this has also meant extending the tools they developed for cities for use in regional towns. The projects we'll be taking you through today form part of our ongoing partnership with the CRC, which has assisted Water New South Wales to deliver our urban program. Water New South Wales has been working with councils in the catchment for over 20 years. We found we needed a tool to help us assess improvements in urban water management. We initially tried a number of benchmarking techniques, but found they were expensive to carry out and were extremely resource intensive. We liked the CRC Water Sensitive Cities benchmark tool, but found that some of our councils couldn't commit to the time and resources necessary to complete the process as regularly as we needed to please our management that we are making progress as we worked with the councils. We approached the CRC with the idea of developing a rapid assessment tool based on their index tool to measure changes over time in council practices and measure the impact our urban programs having on migrating councils towards water sensitivity. I'll be taking you through the product that resulted. Sorry, we've got a little bit of overlap in slides here, but so we engaged the CRC to develop a framework that could support Water New South Wales in gathering the insights generated from the index without the time commitment from councils. The CRC has developed what we're calling a rapid water sensitive city benchmarking tool as a desktop application for Water New South Wales. So I won't go into this in too much detail because Katie's already given an overview. But like the index, the rapid benchmarking tool considers all aspects of the urban water cycle, evaluating the water supply and wastewater, stormwater and waterway management attributes of a council area. The rapid benchmarking tool uses the same 7 goals and corresponding indicators as the Water Sensitive Cities Index that Katie's worked through, and they're displayed again here in the slide. In the desktop tool, each indicator is allocated a score depending on different lines of evidence collected. So evidence we're looking for is based on questions derived from the original Water Sensitive Cities Index, as well as questions that have been added based on the local and Water New South Wales relevant context. For example, for the Sydney drinking water catchment, one such local question is, are councils applying the NOBI or neutral and beneficial effect for new developments effectively? Where in the Water Sensitive Cities Index, a council workshop is undertaken with like 20 to 40 participants, like Katie said, to gather evidence and give scores to each indicator. In our desktop tool, evidence in support of the indicators can be gathered by 3 different categories, which each sequentially provide a greater level of detail. Firstly, evidence can be collected in ways that's easily located in the public domain, such as on the website. Such examples could include a policy and strategy documents or council case studies of projects. Secondly, evidence can be collected using Water New South Wales or industry knowledge based on experience through working collaboratively with the councils. And thirdly, council staff interviews can be used, which offer an internal perspective from within council and offer depth to the assessment. The aim is to interview 1 to 3 council staff as an alternative to conducting the full workshop and the index. Just got a little click here so you can see lines of evidence are recorded. So each time the tool is used, a baseline can be seen. And a confidence rating score, or MLLE, which is multiple lines and levels of evidence score, is also given for each line of evidence to help the user with scoring. For example, if a policy was seen on the internet, however it's out of date and the user is unsure if it's going to be updated, this can be recorded in the evidence assessment in the tool. So the Rapid Water Sensitive City Benchmarking tool is provided in an Excel format. Analysis conducted separately for each council being assessed and by 1 user. Each indicator is given a score out of 5 assessed by the user, whereas scores ranging from 1, which is absent, no evidence of water sensitive practice, to 5, which is demonstrating industry leadership beyond best practice. The user will review collected evidence about each council and determine whether each criteria is present or absent for the council area. It can also select unknown if there's not enough information to determine this. A score is calculated based on this evidence, and justification for the score is recorded, as well as the confidence rating. The tool is qualitative in its assessment and uses a process that's standardized, repeatable, and transparent to minimize subjectivity. It's designed so it can be used in an ongoing way, and new evidence can be added at any time as council's practices change. Official scoring is aimed to be completed by Water New South Wales staff about once a year. The benchmarking tool provides a dashboard assessment of each council that provides a summary of the goal and indicator scores. Scores are provided numerically and in graphs that show overall progress towards a water sensitive city and progress against each goal area. Each goal is scored out of 5 with a total available score of 35. So like where Katie showed the Apple assessment, that's different from our scores in this dashboard, which aren't the accredited CRC Water Sensitive Cities Index scores with their comprehensive equation and analysis. But in our Rapid tool instead, we just use the total scores from each of the goal areas, which can be used internally to measure progress for each goal, and we can set targets for each goal area as well. So we've used the Rapid Water Sensitive City Benchmarking tool to analyse other councils in the Sydney drinking water catchment as a baseline for our next urban program business case. An example of a different council analysis is provided in the slide. So you can see that the analysis can be used to assess council strengths and areas of improvement, and if there are any trends across councils. It's also used to determine what types of projects could be implemented to help improve scores, and this has helped determine where resources may be best placed within Water New South Wales partnerships within councils going forward. It's aimed that the tool will be able to be used ongoingly throughout our future urban program, and that over time it will start to demonstrate that councils are continuing to improve urban water management practices as they transition towards becoming water sensitive cities. So thanks very much to the CRC for the support in creating this tool for us, and also our council partners who have participated in the analysis so far. And thanks for listening to our case study. Does anyone, I guess, questions, Beth, you're going to leave to the end?
Yeah, if we could, that would be good. Thank you, Jules and Alan. And we'll move on to Jeff and his team, and then we'll do questions at the end, if that's all right.
So I share screen from this end? Yeah. You cannot start sharing. Oh, okay.
I think we need Julia to stop
Julia,
sharing.
you need to close your screen off and stop sharing.
Oh, I need to stop. Sure can.
There we go.
Okay.
Is that better?
Sure.
Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. I'll start while we're loading the PowerPoint. We do have lots of slides, so I'll,
Is that the full screen?
not quite. There we go.
Yeah.
So I'll move through the slides as rapidly as possible, but also just sharing, because for us, it's been an amazing journey, and we've really appreciated the support we've gotten from both Water New South Wales and the CRC for water sensitive cities in our quest to become a water sensitive Blue Mountains in our transition process. I'd like to start by just one of the important pillars, and our top one in our strategy is the Caring for Country, or NURA. And we really have been working closely with both the Darug and the Gundungurra to appreciate the spiritual aspects, the physical aspects of water, because the living waters of the Blue Mountains have sustained countless generations, and we're really working and looking towards ongoing partnerships and learning together to look after this precious resource. So we're a city within the World Heritage Area, one of two in the world. It's us in the Southern Hemisphere and Banff in the Northern Hemisphere. And everything that leaves our city ends up in a surrounding World Heritage Area and downstream drinking water catchments. But for water being a precious resource, once it goes over those waterfalls, it's lost to our city and requires huge amounts of energy to pump it back up. So whether for the upper mountains, whether it's being pumped over from Oberon, from the Fish River, all the way up to the Blue Mountains, or when it goes all the way down to Warragamba Dam, it has to be pumped back up. There's a CO2 footprint with every kiloliter of potable water. So one of the things we recognized was protecting the downstream World Heritage waterways, but also trying to hold water up in the landscape. One of the reasons that Blue Mountains is such a special place, we have a large number of threatened and endangered species, a large number of groundwater dependent ecosystems. And because we have escarpments on either side, you can see it's all sandstone. It's not like there's a giant swimming pool underneath the Blue Mountains. So virtually all of our vegetation is groundwater dependent. It all taps into these little aquicludes. You get these layers of clay stone and ironstone that trap the water, and water in the Blue Mountains moves horizontal, not vertical. So then it appears in these bands of vegetation. But because of the beautiful escarpments and the clean waterways and waterfalls, it underpins our economy. Our ecotourism economy has 4.3 million visitors and really underpins how the Blue Mountains functions. We have pressures on our waterways that probably looks like a nice waterfall, but you can see it's full of foam. It's from we have the Great Western Highway that splits our city into two catchments. So we have the drinking water catchment on one side, and the Gross is just one of the two wild rivers in the state of New South Wales on the western side. And this is just from a single truck spilling some substances into the waterfall and turn it into a giant foam bubble bath. Unfortunately, we get more noxious pollutants, and in one case we had some bifenthrin, which is the traumaticide that was over-applied and also spilled directly into a stormwater system that conveyed this pesticide straight into Jameson Creek. And on a single day, we lost over 1,000 crayfish, and most of them were buried, which I mean by that is you can see the one with eggs in the bottom corner. And that female would be somewhere between 50 and 80 years old. So not only did we lose whole generations of crayfish, we also lost all the macroinvertebrates and fish species as well. And if we didn't have recruitment from some of our surrounding systems that were still healthy, we would have extinct species. We'd have a dead creek. The other impacts, of course, is all the impervious surfaces. We get huge changes in velocities and volumes of water. And when they hit our sandstone environment or our hanging swamp system, it's like a hot knife through butter. You get a real collapse of the system, you get a drawdown of the water table, you get huge incisement and the transport of tremendous amounts of sediment into our system. This is a gross pollutant trap near Katoomba Falls Reserve, just to give you an idea. From a single event, that gross pollutant trap, that Aramie trap, captured 120 tons of sediment. And just beyond the trap is one of our little tiny dwarf mountain pines that grows on this waterfall spray zone. And we used to have to send abseilers over the falls to hand weed, but now we're trying to stop the sediment from smothering this rare and endangered plant. Along with the nutrients that come into stormwater, that also promotes aquatic weed growth. We had one of our lovely natural rare upland waterways at Glenbrook Lagoon, one of only 3 in the Hot Springs European system, that got totally inundated with 2 weeds of national significance. It was first totally covered by Salvinia. We harvested and treated the Salvinia only to discover underneath a more noxious weed, Kabumba carolinea. So after 10 years of work, we finally restored Glenbrook Lagoon, but boy, did it take a lot of money. And that's why it's better to protect a good waterway than try to restore a polluted one. So an ounce prevention is definitely the way that our strategy promotes future looking after our waterways.
And that's a before photo there. So you can see the Kabumba, which was basically colonizing 95% of the water body.
Yeah, Kabumba's a noxious weed from South America, and it grows from the benthic layer straight through the entire water column. So that's actually about 4 meters deep. Had that weed escaped into the drinking supply and got into Warragamba Dam, it would have caused a huge headache. Up in Queensland, they have to spend millions each year harvesting because they can't use chemicals in the drinking supply catchment. So by controlling it in Glenbrook Lagoon, we stopped the spread of it to the Oxford Nepean River, which would have ruined the bridge race forever, and more importantly, stopped it from getting into our drinking supply catchment. The other interesting thing about water, of course, is the amount of water needed to fight fires. We know we had really bad bushfires last year, and when you have these Erickson Crane helicopters, I believe this is Gypsy Moth, she slurps up about 8,000 to 9,000 liters in about 8 seconds and drops it on the fire, which is a good thing, but that's a lot of water. And during the last several major fires, we actually had to import water from outside our LGA to fill up dams, to fill up artificial ponds, and to replace some of the water that was used during the water bombing. So we wanted to start with a new approach. If most councils will remember, the state government actually supported every local government in developing a stormwater management plan and even funded an officer. So that was a really great kickstart for a lot of councils to start to manage the impacts of urban runoff. This happened after we had the 1,000-mile blue-green algae bloom. So water quality and urban runoff really became a big issue. Having said that, fast forward, we did mention water-sensitive urban design in that old 2005 strategy, but it took us 10 years or a little bit more like 15 years to actually bring it into fruition with our new water-sensitive Blue Mountain strategic plan. So the embedded into our water-sensitive approach, obviously, are the key pillars. What we're looking at is one of our award-winning green roofs on our culture center. It was designed to kind of be like an infinity pool so that the vegetation just married in with the escarpment, but more importantly, it's a high-profile showcase. It's a pilot project that we use to win over our senior management, to win over our community, and it was, we were really fortunate that be able to have some of these demonstration sites. We were able to slowly win over people about the importance of incorporating water sensitive urban design. And just to give you an idea of how this evolves, this green roof was now going to be transformed into a green kitchen garden. So we're going to grow organic vegetables, and the biofiltration system underneath will mitigate the nutrients, and so that we can help with a new planetary health center, which I'll come to later.
So projects like this are awesome, and we have a few examples of this around the Blue Mountains. But as part of our development of our integrated water strategy, we want this kind of thing to be embedded into our day-to-day business.
Exactly, and also
not just something that we can do when we get extra grant funding, but it becomes the way we do business as an everyday part of being a city within a World Heritage Area.
Correct. And just to give you an example, because of the success of this green roof, I was just asked to get for our old Civic Center to have we're putting in for a grant for green walls and green roofs along that center to transform the downtown Katoomba area to increase the water literacy of our local community.
So to kick off the process of developing our next generation of our integrated water management plan, our water sensitive Blue Mountains strategic plan, we did a lot of internal staff consultation. We were lucky enough to have Alexa Macaulay of Macaulay Knights, who has a lot of experience in this area. She was actually involved in the development of the Cultural Centre Green Roof and also another rain garden that we have at Echo Point. We did a number of, so she, in collaboration with Alexa, we did a lot of multiple facilitated workshops and one-on-one interviews with key staff. All over, we pretty much engaged about 80 staff from across all areas of council. And out of this consultation, we were able to develop a shared vision and a framework for going forward and a draft action plan. And at this point, we were very fortunate to be able to start working with the CRC for water sensitive cities through the Water New South Wales Urban Program, which Julia mentioned before. She talked about one of its aims being to improve the management of urban stormwater across the Sydney drinking water catchments. These workshops were facilitated by the CRC for water sensitive cities and funded by Water New South Wales. So the purpose of these workshops was to try and deepen our understanding of our community's vision for local waterways and to get a sense of their level of water literacy around water issues. We wanted to dive into our community aspirations. What do they want for our waterways heading into the future? And what are some of the things that what are some projects that we can potentially collaborate with our community on as we go forward? So we ran three workshops. We had about 67 people. We got key stakeholders from our community, from Bush Care, from Blue Mountains Conservation Society, from some of the community catchment groups. Our stakeholders were involved, Water New South Wales, of course, Sydney Water, and then other key staff from across council as well. These workshops, these actually became an extension of our public consultation process. So by working with the CRC for water sensitive cities and being supported by Water New South Wales in this way, we were able to really enrich that public consultation process and go beyond the standard tools of things like Have Your Say. We were able to, it was an opportunity to get everyone in a room to build those relationships, to get to know people's names, to promote what we're doing face to face, and to really look for some of those collaborative opportunities. And out of this process, we were able to further develop and really get buy-in for our vision, which is to become a leader in sustainable water management. And as a city within a World Heritage Area, you know, we want to be known for being a sustainable, livable and water sensitive cities because we have some of the best waterways in Australia. So after the workshops, we were able to really draw on and take advantage of the expertise and the experience of the CRC, working with organisations from across Australia and in different parts of the world. They did a review on our draft strategic plan based on the feedback from the community workshops, but also based on a desktop review that they did against the Water Sensitive Cities framework. They came up with about a dozen recommendations for us, which we were able to either fold into our strategic plan or add to our action list of how we were going to create a living document out of our strategic plan. We don't want something that is just going to sit on the shelf. We actually want to change hearts and minds, and we want to drive the culture of our organisation to become a water sensitive city. So a couple of the key recommendations, one was to undertake a review of what barriers we're facing in terms of becoming a water sensitive city and to develop a strategy and actions to address these. Another was to really build the integration within council and to identify and support the champions that we have. And a third one was to develop a council policy statement. So in this respect, we were, we really, the guidance of the CRC based on their evidence-based approach, the research that they've done from around the world, and that incredible expertise that they've got was really gold for us. Oops. And so we were able to get our strategic plan adopted by council in September 2019. It had crossbench support.
It was one of the few times when we presented our initial proposal to do a plan, and the mayor said, that's the first time all 12 councillors stood up and gave a standing ovation. So we've got tremendous adoption, buy-in from the top, which is critical. So it's not just our elected council, it's also our executive leadership team that backs us 100%. So what we decided, and I think what makes our strategy so useful, is that we had a lot of trial and error through the urban runoff control program, where we developed our priority catchment approach, and also that whole looking at that everything that happens in a catchment ends up in the waterway, and that's really the pulse of the lifeblood of how healthy a catchment is. So we've continued with the funding that we had from Water New South Wales to roll out this whole of catchment approach. And the idea is we work right throughout the catchment, trying to capture every single tributary as high up the system as possible, starting, of course, at the household level. So we run workshops in those priority catchments, encouraging people to put on rainwater tanks, hold water up, gray water reuse systems, any way that we can hold the water in the landscape. And then at the key nodes throughout the system, we design these filtration rain garden systems that allow the water to be filtered, infiltrate the groundwater, because once it goes over the waterfall, it's lost to our city. So we want to hold it up as long as possible in the landscape, but also then makes it a greener city, more livable, addresses heat island effect, and also makes us a little bit more fireproof by having having water in the landscape. So that whole of catchment approach, and this particular map, it's a bit hard to see, but we did, I think, 10 different sites through the very first Water New South Wales grant, where we put in rain gardens at each of those sites. And I'll show you some photos in a sec. So here's an example of one of the ones that we had at the old Dale Street wetlands. So we've got a gross pollutant trap of, is similar to the one that was full of sediment. We were very fortunate to have a local company whose motto is let the water do the work. And they use these dual vein systems to push all the gross pollutants into these traps, filter out all the sediment, and then it allows the water to go through the rain garden system. And then in high flow events, we always have to make sure we have a bypass. And this happened to be on the day when there was a Australian Stream Management Conference, and so we also used it as a kind of a catchment crawl to showcase to other councils and visitors how these systems work. Here's a couple more around the lake. We want to protect our valuable waterways, particularly the ones that support swimming. So we've restored hanging swamps, and we have these step-down systems where it's almost like a chain of pools where the first pool fills up and then it spills into the next one. And the whole idea being is we want to manage water. And that particular one you're looking at, it was able to trap and treat an entire 20-minute rain event and hold all the water and treat it. And we were then able to measure before and after, and I'll show you the results in just a sec. Here's another one, but we tried to add some habitat in there, and just beyond there, we actually now also have what's called a rafted reed bed that functions both to treat stormwater, but also to provide turtle habitat. And we were out this week, last Tuesday, and found fresh turtle eggs. So the idea being is when turtles come out of the water and lay their eggs on land, they're open to predation from foxes. So we're working with the University of Western Sydney to provide safe turtle habitat in our waterways. So the results that we get, so once again, one of the beauties of this project was one of the few where we had funding for monitoring. So hats off to Water New South Wales for providing the laboratory resources necessary to be able to provide evidence that our systems work. We're getting tremendous knockdown in the bacteria levels of fecal coliforms, reduction in suspended solids, and a significant reduction in both total nitrogen and phosphorus, which is very important in drinking water catchments. A couple of our showcase events, we have a stormwater harvesting reuse center down at Echo Point, one of our highest visitation areas. And the idea being is by harvesting and using that harvested water for flushing the public toilets, we can save up to 2 megaliters of fresh potable water a year. With the other showcase garden, which I said, these are so important, having these pilot projects to be able to demonstrate to our senior staff and our elected council that these things work. So having the award-winning green roof at the Culture Center also made a huge difference. So we were very fortunate to have some of that Green Precincts funding from the federal government.
And of course, so the on-ground projects and the infrastructure is really important, but at the end of the day, you also need to be winning some hearts and minds. So I'll talk a little bit about a Connecting Kids, Creeks and Catchments program. We, as a basis for our program, we kind of, to paraphrase Dave Attenborough, the idea that if you love something, you will want to protect it. So we put between 600 and 1,200 children a year from across the Blue Mountains, from 3-year-olds right through to year 12s through our program. We focus on it's a focus on connecting to nature and developing citizen science skills. So we have a motto, which is death to worksheets. We want our program to be hands-on, we want it to be experiential, and we want it to be meaningful learning for them. So out of that, we get those kids to connect to the nature that's in their backyard. They move slowly through it. They're using all 5 of their senses. We're trying to awaken a sense of wonder and a sense of awe, and to really develop that love for that area that they're in, and an understanding of the science behind how it all works. So a big focus for us is on catchment health, and we look at the impacts of stormwater and also the values in terms of what's in their backyard. So we start off in the classroom, but then our mission is to get those kids beyond that big black fence and out into some of those incredible areas that we're so lucky to have in the Blue Mountains right next to our schools. And of course, so the kids are learning, they're getting a new experience, they're developing that connection to nature, but we also talk about taking action. So whether it's developing and running a waterways festival for their community where the kids are developing up all their own educational materials and talks and presenting that to their family and their friends, or getting up there and drain stenciling, or building a rain garden at their school. There's a range of things that we do with the schools. We also work with Council's Youth Council to develop projects with them in terms of connecting to nature. So that's just a little bit of an overview of some of our projects, but we'll take you back to some of the assistance we've received from the CRC for Water Sensitive Cities and Water New South Wales. I talked about how the previous report by the CRC identified the need to undertake an analysis of some of the barriers that exist in terms of making our water sensitive city strategy a living document. Well, this benchmarking and transition workshop, which was a one-day workshop, involved, once again, staff from across council. A primary purpose of that was to precisely look at those potential barriers and then some of those solutions to the implementation of our plan. So it involved the application of the Water Sensitive Cities Index that Katie spoke about earlier in a collaborative workshop. It involved interviews with key staff and also a desktop review. Some of at the end of the day, we kind of got a potted history of where we are at as a waterways city, and we found that we as a water sensitive city, and we found that we rank fairly highly as a waterways city, and we've got a good base in moving ahead to become a water sensitive city. But yeah, we still have a good way to go, and we have some challenges ahead. Katie spoke before about that collaborative workshop process, and we just found that a really brilliant process to benchmark ourselves and to see visually where we are at exactly on that water sensitive city continuum. That process of bringing people together, from the urban planners to the engineers to the guys who work down in the street pulling the gump out of the stormwater drains, bringing those people together and sharing their understanding and knowledge, that was gold in terms of breaking down those silos and getting people to interact across areas and across departments, and to get an understanding of where we're coming from in our own separate work areas. It was also a really good opportunity for us to identify some potential internal champions for us to really support into the future. The CRC also provided us with some analysis looking at some of the barriers that are holding us back in terms of the extent to which council is committed to becoming a water sensitive city, the kinds of plans that we have in place to guide our way forward, and some of the operational components, what sort of plans we have for on-ground delivery into the future. They gave us some recommendations going forward around building champions within council at multiple levels, creating connecting platforms, which we've gone ahead to do. We've reinvigorated our integrated water management group, creating new policy, which we're in the process of doing, and we'll talk a little bit about that later as well. Grow and expanding some of our partnerships with Water New South Wales and Sydney Water and other stakeholders, and really looking into those collaborative projects within our community and developing up things like some of the things that were identified in the earlier workshops, and looking at internal staff capacity and training as well.
Sorry to interrupt. We're about 7 minutes over time at the minute. Yes. So,
okay, shall I just quickly wrap up in 1 minute?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so we've gone on. We're basically at the cusp of implementing some of those recommendations now, aren't we, Jeffrey?
Correct.
So our next steps are to really cement our water strategy into our operational planning and our 4-year planning, seeking external funding, creating annual action plans. We are gaining momentum So we're first cab off the rank in terms of our local strategic planning statement. We're embedded in that now, so that's a really good path forward for us. We've got some great news from the field that we can talk about. And our water sensitive Blue Mountain Strategic Plan won an award in the 2020 Excellence in the Environment Awards this year. So it's, yeah, I think that connecting with the CRC to help put our plan together has really put us on a fantastic footing to go forward. Anything to add, Jeffrey?
No, as I said, it's just been one of those ideas whose time has come. So just thanks to Jamie and thanks for everyone at both at Water New South Wales and the CRC, because it just seemed to be one of those synergies. The timing was right, the idea is right, and we're really trying to gain traction to embed it in everyday practice here at Council. So it becomes embedded into every retrofit, every new project, and with the new Planetary Health Center, which our GM just announced in this last couple of weeks, it's really converting our old golf course, which sits right on the escarpment, into a planetary health center with several universities involved. So we're very excited about that as well. So thanks so much for allowing us to share, Beth, and for extending that invitation to be part of this webinar.
No worries. No worries. Thanks, guys. Thanks for presenting. So I might just share my screen really quickly and just talk about the next webinars that we have. So next week we have, still talking about the index and the transition dynamics framework. We're doing the case studies. So it's going to be 3 or 4 just case studies. So we won't have the overview like we did at the beginning of today. And then the 8th of December, we're going to be talking about the street tree guidelines. And then 15th of December is the Infuse tool. So yeah, please, I'll send around an email following this to everyone who registered with the link to register for those.